So one of the claims that you hear all the time is over the last 20, 30 years, depending on the statistics you look at, the rich have been clearly getting richer at an accelerating rate, and the middle class basically has stayed flat. I've seen numbers that suggest that real income over the last, since I think the 80s or since the early 90s, real income has been flat for the middle class and rising dramatically for the wealthy. You could say a lot about this. First of all, I don't believe the stats. And I've seen good analysis that shows that it's just wrong because it excludes benefits. And what has happened over the last 30 years is that a greater and greater percentage of earnings to employees is received through benefits. To a large extent because the benefits now are required by law. So employers, instead of giving somebody a raise, they buy them better health insurance, or they give them some other benefit that is required. And so in terms of how much is spent on these employees, on which would be in a free society real wages, middle classes, wages have gone up. Real wages have gone up, and they've gone up quite a bit. They haven't gone up anywhere near the wealthy. So there's no question that the rate of increase of wealth among the wealthy has increased dramatically. Now, if this was a free society, I would say, and this was happening during some period of time, and who knows, it could happen, I'd say, who cares, right? What difference does it make? You make what you make. You get what in the marketplace you are worth. I know people don't like thinking of themselves as being worth something in dollars or cents, but when it comes to your productive ability, yeah, some of you are worth $6 an hour. Some of you are worth thousands of dollars an hour. Some people are worth millions of dollars an hour. It depends on how productive they are. That is, how much wealth they create for themselves or for the company they work for or for the people they trade with. So in a free society, one would say, whatever the distribution of wealth is, it is. Whatever the increases in wages, they are. I truly believe that in a free society, everybody's wages go up quite a bit over time because people get more productive. Technology makes us more productive. Technology is the way in which our wages rise because it increases our productivity. So if you take a relatively free period, now, don't get after me. I know there was slavery and other things in the 19th century. It's not completely free, but in the areas that they were free, they were relatively free. From 1800 to 1850, real wages of Americans doubled. From 1850 to 1900, they doubled again, right? So under economic freedom, people who are productive, their standard of living explodes. Right? You can see it, again, not complete freedom and lots of problems, but you can see it exploding in China. Those people that are involved in kind of the economic revolution of China are benefiting enormously from it. You're seeing in front of our eyes the creation of a middle class in China, something that didn't exist before elements of capitalism were introduced into the Chinese economy. I would argue, though, that one of the effects of regulations, one of the effects of government controls, one of the effects of cronyism is to benefit some people at the expense of other people. And the fact is that in the way our regulations are structured, the victims of these regulations are often the workers, the middle class, the poor. I mean, the classic example is minimum wage, right? Minimum wage hurts people whose productive ability is less than the minimum wage. They can't find a job. They stay poor forever. They never learn the skills and develop the skills to be able to go into the workforce. But all regulations, environmental regulations, restrict our ability to use technology, to increase the productivity of labor. When labor doesn't become more productive, guess what happens to their wages? They don't go up. So for wages to go up, we have to be free to apply technology in the best, most productive way, right? So a lot of the regulations, whether it's Sarbanes-Oxley, take Sarbanes-Oxley, right? Sarbanes-Oxley cost some companies hundreds of millions of dollars to implement it. Well, where did that money come from? I mean, shareholders still wanted a return on their money, and they could withdraw their capital and give it to somebody else. So that money came from the ability to enhance productivity of employees. In the contrary, Sarbanes-Oxley reduces productivity. So guess what it does to wages? It reduces wages. Dodd-Frank is going to reduce wages. Obamacare is going to reduce wages. And all these things that place a cost on business, an external, artificial, non-real cost, where businesses are now expending money on stuff that's not productive, makes wages actually go down, and actually makes, it turns out, allows, in some cases, allow profits to go up. Or look at the investment banks on Wall Street that gain from inflation. They have the ability, because of the way our central banking system works, they make money as inflation is being created, as the Fed is printing money. When do the workers get compensated for this inflation? Only after the inflation's happened. So if the CPI goes up 10% one year, I hope it never does, but if it does go up 10% a year, only after the fact will the workers get a raise of 10%. But some people have already made, typically the wealthy, typically bankers. It's not their fault. They're just in the chain, right? They're the ones getting the money first. So they make the money before it filters down into everybody else. So they're making money faster than everybody else. But let me give you some other statistics which I find interesting. So there's a guy named Stephen Kaplan of the University of Chicago who did some studies on this wealth, this huge increase in earnings by the very wealthy. What he finds is that athletes are making a lot more money than they used to. Their growth rate in terms of compensation is far higher than it is for CEOs, for business leaders. Actors and actresses make far more money today than they did 20, 30 years ago, much more than CEOs. The growth rate there is greater than CEOs. CEOs make more money, but across the board, we are willing to pay today in the economy we have today a lot more money for talent. Huge amounts, and whether it's for entertainment purposes or whether it's for production purposes. Talent, the return on talent, if you will, I don't know if that's a legitimate term, but the return on talent is huge right now. And if you're just an average employee, the return on being an average employee is not large. It's pretty low. But the really talented, the really good CEOs, the really exceptional CEOs, the exceptional basketball players, the exceptional actors make a fortune. If you're a mediocre actor, your salary's not gone up in 20 years. But if you're Tom Cruise, it's gone through the roof. And more through the roof today than it did 50, 60 years ago. So the difference today between exceptional actors and mediocre actors is much greater today. Now, so there's a society-wide phenomena where this is happening. It's not just in CEOs. It's not just the so-called wealthy. It's, if you will, talent. Let me make one more argument. So there's a premium to talent. There's a huge return on skill, on robust skill sets. And indeed, if you want to make sure that you're going to make more money in the future, develop those skills. It's up to you to develop those skills. But there's another factor that's going on here, which is interesting. There was a Wall Street Journal article, I think, last week about this, and that is that as more laborers entered the market because of globalization and because of freeing up of economies in all these countries, globalization is perceived as a negative word. There were more and more laborers entering the labor market. Now, what do we know happens when you see an increase in the supply of something and the demand, at least for a while, stays constant, so it doesn't keep up? Prices drop. So if you're just, again, an average worker, if you're a steel worker, if you're even an auto worker, if you're just doing relatively manual things, then yeah, your wages have been bid down by the entrance of new participants into the market. Yet during this period, since the late 80s to today, when all these other markets have freed up, there's been a shortage in something. There's been a shortage in skill, there's been a shortage in talent, and there's been a shortage in capital. So you've got more countries, more companies, more people competing for a very small pool of talent, of capital, of skill. Those people have benefited enormously from that. But that is a consequence of competition. That is a consequence of we've gone through this dramatic period. I mean, it's hard to, particularly for young people, it's hard to imagine how much the world is different today than it was, let's say, 1985, when the Berlin Wall was still up, when the Soviet republics were still around, when China was just starting to make the first small steps away from Marxism, when Vietnam was still a horrific Marxist country, where even South Korea and Taiwan were just starting to come out, really progress economically. Suddenly, in the last 30 years, you've got this boom of economic activity, which has resulted in a huge demand for capital and skills. And that has driven up the return on capital and skill. A big part of why an NBA basketball player can make a lot of money is because people today in China and Vietnam watch NBA. And they pay for that. And so the revenues in that system are much greater. So globalization has increased the returns on skill and increased the returns on capital. And that is a good thing, because the returns on capital then get redeployed, they create more business activity, and ultimately, it just takes a long time given the controlled and given the nature of this globalized economy. Ultimately, that capital gets deployed to increase the productivity of labor, and the wages of labor go up as well. So this is a long-term process. It's a long-term process that is messy because of the mixed economy, but it is nevertheless, this would have happened. This is happening because there's more freedom in the world, at least in other places, not so much here, but in other places, which increases demand for certain things and not for others.